Good morning and welcome to the Foreign Desk podcast. I'm Lisa Daftari. We are finally closing upon 2020. Finally, despite seeming like this year would never end, I think we all have some very strong feelings about how 2020 has been. But nonetheless, today we will do a year in review and talk about the issues that will matter most in the coming year. We will talk COVID, Iran, China, and more. To discuss all this, I'm extremely happy to call upon my good friend, Dr. Nile Gardiner, the director of the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation. And besides for being a leading global authority on Brexit, Nile previously served as a foreign policy aide to Margaret Thatcher. He has testified several times before Congress on foreign policy issues, frequently providing analysis on global events for television networks, Fox News, Fox Business, CNN, Sky News, BBC, and he is a regular contributor to The Telegraph. Thank you so much for joining us, Nile.
It's my great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Lisa.
So, we obviously have to start with this huge elephant in the room. It's very difficult to talk about 2020 without it just being about COVID from wall to wall. And I know that we want to get to other issues as well. There is this Russian intellectual who said COVID has had a larger impact than a real world war. Let's talk about that. I mean, what are the lasting effects? How will history look upon this year, upon COVID, how it's affected people? I mean, what's your aerial opinion on this?
Well, that's a great question. Of course, this has been an extraordinary year in many respects, a hugely unusual year. Very few predicted that we would be in the current state that we are in with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic, the biggest pandemic in over 100 years. And I think that, there are a few big sort of takeaways from the past year. I think firstly, I think that, US leadership on the world stage really does matter. And we've seen that with regard to the development of two US-led COVID vaccines. There's a third vaccine that's been developed by AstraZeneca and Oxford University in the United Kingdom. And so the US and the UK have developed, the three leading vaccines that will frankly rescue the free world. So US, British leadership really does matter. American leadership matters. And Operation Warp Speed actually was a huge success. And so let's not forget, the American role in terms of turning the world around, defeating COVID in 2021. So I'm optimistic about 2021. This has been an incredibly difficult year. I think next year is going to be, a far better year. I would also mention as well that, this has been a year in which, as well, nation states, national sovereignty really is front and center. So the global response to the COVID-19 pandemic has been led by nation states. It's not been led by the United Nations, for example, which has been largely absent. It has been led by individual nation states like the United States and the United Kingdom, for example. And I think thirdly as well, with regard to the overall COVID situation, it has demonstrated, once again, the complete lack of responsibility from China and China's whole role in terms of initially covering up the outbreak of the virus and allowing it then to spread to the rest of the world is an absolute disgrace. So China must be held to account.
Absolutely. And we're going to get to that New York Times expose from just a few days ago that outlines their role in all of this. Interesting for that to come out only now, but we will get to that. I want to go back to your initial statement about COVID, about this being led by the United States. We also had an election here, and the entire Democrat platform was nothing but, Donald Trump failed us on COVID. How do you think that narrative affected us? We obviously had a very different presidency with the Trump presidency. We had 8 years of, apologetic. We don't want to be the leaders of the world under the Obama foreign policy. And then we had 4 years of a real offense type, president or leader led foreign policy with Donald Trump. And then all of a sudden you have this election, which really put us to shame as Americans because of that narrative. How do you think that's going to take us into 2021 under a potential Biden presidency?
Yeah, I think that, firstly, I think that President Trump, his biggest legacy with regard to COVID is the fact that the US has developed two world-beating vaccines, and so that I think is the most important issue. Every single country in the world has faced immense challenges with COVID, and of course there are a lot of detractors of President Trump out there over his handling of the pandemic. But the reality is he put in place a plan to develop the vaccines that are going to turn around the world's economies in 2021, that are going to save huge numbers of lives, tens of millions of lives, no doubt, in 2021. And this is a massive achievement. I mean, he basically said that we're going to build these vaccines by the end of the year, and he achieved that. And that is the single biggest achievement, I think, for the Trump presidency on the COVID front. And yet again, it's the United States leading on the world stage. And yes, the United States has been hit hard by COVID, as has every single major country on the international stage. Every world leader has faced immense challenges, and a great deal of the criticism of President Trump has been highly politically motivated. The same kind of criticism that Boris Johnson has faced in the United Kingdom, for example, and many other leaders have faced. So, but at the end of the day, the US is riding to the rescue of the entire free world. That's a big achievement. Let's not forget that. And US leadership, US exceptionalism, and US brilliance and innovation really does matter on the world stage.
Yeah, I want to move on to Europe. Obviously, the UK and the Europeans and how they dealt with COVID. Then I want to move to the Middle East, and we'll end up with China. I want to really get to each part, and I know that your expertise is in all of that. So I really want to focus in on a few key issues here. Let's talk about COVID in Europe, and how, I mean, they were brutally hit, and way before we got it on the East Coast and then on the West Coast here in the United States. But how did that affect Europe? And then my follow-up question will be, as we're hitting the expiration date for the EU and Britain to work out the details of Brexit, how has this all affected the present and future short term in Europe?
Yeah, very, very important questions there, Lisa. And with regard to the impact of COVID in Europe, it has been an incredibly difficult few months for the whole of Europe. And Europe has faced the same challenges that the United States has faced. European leaders have faced similar criticisms that President Trump has faced on so many COVID-related issues. I think that the impact of COVID actually in Europe has demonstrated actually that at the end of the day, it's nation states that are critically important in terms of responding to a global pandemic like this. So the European response to COVID was led by individual countries. Great Britain, for example, now, of course, outside of the European Union, but also by Germany, France. Individual European countries basically led the way, and European leaders in nation states led the way in terms of the actual response. The European Union was a bystander, basically, in the European Commission. The executive branch of the EU played a very minimal role in terms of the COVID response. You saw borders being basically re-implemented across the European Union, border controls being put in place. And so sovereignty, self-determination really was center stage in terms of the COVID response in Europe. And the European Union, I think, was shown to be extremely ineffective in terms of any kind of COVID response. Now, you also brought up the issue of the UK-EU trade deal. Those negotiations are still taking place. There is speculation that a deal is about to be struck. We don't have confirmation yet from Downing Street on this. The negotiations have been extremely difficult, and these negotiations are focused upon the future trading relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union. And I have to say, the EU's approach towards these negotiations has been extremely mean-spirited throughout these last few months. They've treated these negotiations as some kind of punishment beating for Britain daring to leave the European Union, to send a warning message to other European countries that if they leave the EU, there'll be consequences. But the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has stood his ground. and the UK is not making any concessions to the European Union, and Brexit, of course, will be great for the British people. It'll be great for Europe as well. It'll be great for the United States also, and for the US-UK special relationship. And I think that Britain will be a tremendous success story in the Brexit era.
Yeah, definitely. They're making it a very strong case for the Britain to get out as fast as possible, right?
Yeah.
Next, I want to move on to probably one of my favorite foreign policy achievements of 2020. I know you and I were both there September 15th on the White House lawn as we witnessed the signing of the Abraham Accords. Real historic moment. And here's Donald Trump that day making a statement about those accords.
We're here this afternoon to change the course of history. After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East. Thanks to the great courage of the leaders of these three countries, we take a major stride toward a future in which people of all faiths and backgrounds live together in peace and prosperity. In a few moments, these visionary leaders will sign the first two peace deals between Israel and the Arab state in more than a quarter century. In Israel's entire history, there have previously been only two such agreements. Now we have achieved two in a single month, and there are more to follow.
Yeah, and more to follow. I mean, this is tremendous. I always say I can't emphasize enough how important this is to people who understand the history, the politics of the region, the fact that this was an impossible get, and yet the Trump administration figured out a real way to incentivize peace, not just a piece of paper, but a real deal that will bring about tourism and trade and the exchange of technology and patents and things like that. And it's already begun. We're seeing so much of that. And every time I post that, I have people commenting, well, why is this important to the United States? You know, why should we care if President Trump did this? You know, and now where we have this COVID stimulus package, I know that there's a lot of countries that get these handouts from the United States. Many of those countries that are not deserving of those monthly allowance checks that, you know, we just write out, and we've just done that because it's traditionally what the U.S. does. But Israel is on that list, and a lot of people, you know, cite Israel. Why are we giving money to Israel? Israel being the one nation that arguably we do have a relationship with. We give that aid in exchange for X, Y, and Z. Niall, I know you cover this as well as many other things in the Middle East. Why is this significant? And more importantly, the broader issue, why is the U.S.-Israel relationship so important? And why is it that this is the one relationship that Democrats, Republicans, it's a bipartisan issue that we cannot, we can't afford to lose this relationship.
Absolutely, that's 100% right. And we were both there at the White House for the historic signing of the Abraham Accords. And you cannot underestimate the significance of what happened there. You had Israel signing an historic agreement, basically, that is a real game changer for the future of the Middle East. And I think the Trump presidency has actually accomplished more in terms of advancing peace in the Middle East than any U.S. administration in many, many decades. And so we cannot in any way, I think, underestimate the scale of the achievement there. And Israel, of course, is our most important ally in the Middle East. It is vitally important that the United States stands shoulder to shoulder with Israel. And the Abraham Accords have significantly strengthened the long-term prosperity and security of Israel in the region. And we are now seeing, at last, actually, many of the Arab nations in the region now developing closer ties with Israel. And a few years ago, this would have been deemed absolutely impossible, but this has been achieved, and largely thanks to the leadership of President Trump and also Benjamin Netanyahu as well, and together with many leaders as well in the region. And I think that this is a historic development. It has actually been a series of events that has significantly sidelined and undermined Iran, the biggest menace and aggressor in the region. It has also weakened the position of Palestinian terrorist organizations as well. And I think that this is, This is a scenario that significantly enhances the long-term safety and security of our closest friend and ally in the Middle East. That's a big achievement. That's a big deal. And we stand with the people of Israel, and the people of Israel stand with us as well. And we have no stronger and closer partner in the Middle East than the Israeli people.
What do you foresee happening to the Abraham Accords in the new administration?
Well, that's a very important question, and I hope that the new administration will fully embrace the positive momentum that has come forward over the course of the last few years under the Trump presidency. And the reality is that President Trump achieved what President Obama could not, advancing forward the prospects for peace in the region. And I think that the new presidency has to embrace the positive momentum here. They have to ensure that this legacy, actually from the Trump administration, is secured and advanced forward. But I have to say that Joe Biden's record as vice president, when he served alongside Barack Obama, was not a very good one when it came to Middle East policy. And so I'm concerned about the policy positions of many of the officials as well around Biden, and the Obama White House was no friend of Israel, frankly. In fact, they treated the Israelis in an appalling fashion.
Right.
And so there has to be a reversal of that with a Biden presidency. And but Joe Biden actually, I have to say, has been very quiet on this particular issue, but he needs to reverse the earlier stance of the Obama presidency, which was absolutely appalling, frankly.
Yeah, what he hasn't been quiet about, which is scary, is getting back into the Iran nuclear deal, and that's the other side of that coin, right? Him and his aides have been quite vocal about getting back into the Iran deal. We have congressmen writing letters to get back into the deal with no preconditions, which is just asinine. I mean, I have no idea what country would get back into a nuclear deal with, a rogue nation that is no longer even hiding their nuclear activities and their progress on their weapons development. How likely is this that we're going to get back into a nuclear deal, and what will it look like for U.S. security?
Yeah, a very key issue, I think, on the horizon for 2021, the issue of the Iran nuclear deal, the future of that, and whether or not the United States is going to rejoin the deal. And as you point out, Joe Biden has been very vocal on this issue. He has not been very vocal on the Abraham Accords issue, but on the Iran issue, he has been very vocal. And Joe Biden's position is that the United States should rejoin the JCPOA agreement, the Iran nuclear deal. This would be an absolute disaster, in my opinion. This would be the height of folly, and to rejoin the JCPOA would send completely the wrong signal to the Iranian regime. And Iran is the world's biggest state sponsor of international terrorism. It is a regime that has threatened to wipe Israel off the map. It is a genocidal regime. It is clearly, as we know from Israeli intelligence information, Iran is clearly intent upon building a nuclear weapons program. And the JCPOA, if it is resurrected, will simply allow Iran to build that weapons program after a number of years with all the sunset provisions that are in place. It does nothing to address Iran's missile capability or its conventional military capability. There are serious flaws in this agreement. And now Joe Biden is saying the U.S. Has to go back to this deal, which would be a fatally flawed decision if he decides to go down that route. And I do hope that this can possibly be blocked by the Senate if the Iran nuclear deal is put forward to the Senate as a treaty, as it should be. And I'm sure the Senate would veto it very, very swiftly. There is no real support in Congress for the Iran nuclear deal. In fact, even many Democrats, I think, are opposed to the deal, which is why the Obama administration did not put forward the JCPOA as a treaty for Senate ratification several years ago.
Right. Look, the evidence speaks against it, and it seems like since the Obama era, where they did push this through, where many people were naive about this and saying, "Look, let's normalize relations with the Iranian regime." They would look at the Iranian people and think, "Well, we're doing them a favor." Meanwhile, the reality on the ground has become more recognized, it's covered by the media more. We're hearing voices of the people on the ground, whether it's in Iran or the region, right? We're seeing why the Abraham Accords were so successful, because the people of the region have had a coming of age, the real Arab Spring, I call it, because they've come to realize that the future is not in extremism, but in modernity, in technology, in advancements. And when you see the people of Iran telling the United States, we want someone like Trump. There's such a support for Trump among the people in Iran, and people don't know that. We're also seeing it in the Arab world. We're also seeing it in France. And you saw with Macron, and when he said, "We will not cease to publish cartoons," and that was just a nod to free speech, to free press. And you saw protests and boycotts across the Arab world, across the Africa, and in Pakistan, in Kuwait, in Jordan, Morocco, Egypt. It's a bit of a wake-up call. When Obama passed the nuclear, or when he got into or became signatory to the JCPOA, there was a different feeling globally. Now I think there's a bit of an awakening towards extremism. I mean, what's your take on that? If you look at Europe, look at the Middle East, what has changed?
Yeah, I think there has been a wake-up call in the region actually over the course of the last few years, and you've seen strong U.S. leadership on the Iran front, which has united America's allies within the Gulf states, and you now have this coalition that is standing shoulder to shoulder with the United States and confronting the Iranian regime. And you have the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, for example, working very closely together with the U.S. in confronting Iran. And that really is a testament to strong, bold US leadership over the past 4 years, as opposed to the era of appeasement that you saw under Obama and Biden. And Joe Biden was a big part of Obama's foreign policy.
Right.
It was an integral part of the appeasement mindset of the Obama presidency. And any return to that, I think, would be absolutely devastating. You've also mentioned as well the situation in France, and we've had a wave of terror attacks in France. We've had the beheading of several French citizens by Islamist terrorists, and Emmanuel Macron, to his credit on this issue, has taken a very strong stance in support of freedom of speech, in standing up to Islamist terror, and I think that in Europe as well, you are seeing some increasingly tough policies being taken by some European leaders in the face of Islamist terror and ideology, and that's a very positive development.
Do you think there's a buyer's remorse in Europe with regards to their very lax attitude on migrants, on immigration, on allowing these groups not to assimilate, and then seeing this growth in extremism on their own soil?
Yeah, I think certainly that Europe is facing the consequences in many ways of some lax policies in the past, and a lack of willingness to deal with the rising Islamist threat. You now have across Europe far tighter border controls. I do think that European intelligence agencies are far more effective now in terms of tracking and combating Islamist terrorists. But as we see in France, I mean, the threat is very, very real. It's still out there. And I think as well that the open borders policy that Angela Merkel implemented in Germany, allowing in over 1 million refugees from countries such as Syria, for example, Afghanistan, and other sort of war zones, that was a very, very dangerous policy, and that I think has a long-term damaging impact upon European security.
Right, and society. We can see that it's definitely changed the landscape over there. Speaking of extremism, you look at Europe and their experience right now in dealing with this reality. Yet you also see Europe really straddling the idea of getting back into a relationship with Iran or calling them out on it. Every day you see a different story. On the one hand, Europeans call out, the Iranian regime's behavior on going forward with their, the satellite images came out last week that they're going forward and building these nuclear plants, that they're enriching uranium. Obviously, the human rights, the horrific stories that come out aren't even brought to the forefront, but we'll leave that to the side. But they call them out on the one hand, and on the other hand, they just don't have what it takes to say, look, we're out. Do what Donald Trump did and call them out and, step back. You can't normalize relations with a terrorist regime. Why are we not seeing that from Europe?
Yeah, I think that, with regard to Europe, there is this broader appeasement mentality that we also saw in the US under Obama. And you have many European governments, especially the French and the German governments, as well as the European Union as a whole, appeasing the Iranian regime on many fronts. And so while there is criticism of Iran's absolutely atrocious human rights record, at the same time, many European countries want to see the lifting of US and international sanctions against Iran. There's a big business element related to this, and there's a large number of German companies, for example, that do business with Iran. Trade between Germany and Iran has been very significant over the course of the last decade. And so many European officials would like to see the lifting of sanctions. They don't like to see the US sanctions in place. And there are significant business and trade interests at stake for Europe, which unfortunately has impacted the overall sort of political policy. I think the British government has been more hardline on Iran than a lot of continental European governments, because in part because the UK has very little in the way of business interests in Iran, but also the UK traditionally takes a much more assertive stance on the international stage. But it would be an absolutely terrible combination to have European leaders working together with a Biden presidency to lift sanctions against Iran. That would be an immensely self-defeating, damaging, and dangerous policy.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of dangerous, I want to get to the next foreign policy crisis of 2020, and will definitely carry us into 2021. And this is beautifully said by our good friend, Nikki Haley. Let's take a listen.
Wake up, America. I mean, this is nothing small. China has wanted to dominate the world for a long time. They want to bring down America. And they almost did that with the coronavirus. What we have to do is understand we've got to quit talking about China, and we've got to do something about China. They are trying to go and spy on our satellites. They're trying to build up their military. They're the biggest human rights abuser. They're trying to control communication. They're getting involved in elections. We have to stop talking about China, and we have to start doing something about it. And that's not happening.
Holding China accountable. I mean, across the board, we can talk about COVID. We can talk about the spies that are sent here. We can talk about the students that are here. We could talk about they're stealing our technology, our patents, our intellectual property across the board. I mean, what do we do about China?
Well, perfectly said by Nikki Haley. And Ambassador Haley, I think, is the closest we have in the United States to a Margaret Thatcher today. And she has a very clear-eyed vision for US leadership in the world, and her statements on China are absolutely spot on there. We have to view China not as a potential partner for the United States, as many on the left do. We have to view China as an adversary. China is the enemy of the free world, and China's Communist Party devotes a great amount of its time to trying to undermine the United States and the free world. And we have to combat China's threat, its influence on every single front, as Ambassador Haley pointed out so eloquently. And we have to really have a complete 360-degree strategy for dealing with China as an adversary. And unfortunately, I think that under some previous U.S. administrations, especially the Obama presidency, you saw the United States almost sleepwalking in its policy with regard to China. And China was making tremendous ground on the international stage at America's expense. I think with President Trump, for the first time, you had a US presidency that was willing to stand up in many decades to the Chinese threat. And China has tremendous superpower ambitions. It wants to displace the United States as the world's dominant power. We cannot allow that to happen. US leadership matters, and only the United States can lead the world. And we have to confront the enemies of freedom, and China is top of that list.
Right.
And we have to be prepared to stand up to China on every single front. We have to be strong in our determination, robust in our resolve, and we cannot in any way make concessions to Beijing.
Yeah, we haven't heard any strong comments come out of the Biden administration on what they will do regarding the China threat. I know when we were looking at President Trump, who was then, I don't even think he was candidate Trump. He was just a New Yorker, a businessman who would often take some media hits, and he would go on and say, we have to curb China. We have to stop them from taking advantage of us economically. I mean, taking our jobs, our business, production, manufacturing, export, etc., and bring those jobs back home. And this was, again, before he was even a candidate. So we know where he stood. It was really for making America stronger and financially and otherwise. And now we look at China as a security threat. What will it look like? How do you potentially see this under a Biden administration?
Well, I have to say, I don't have a lot of faith in Joe Biden's ability to stand up to China, because he hasn't demonstrated an ounce of determination or strength in standing up to China before. And Joe Biden, as far as I can see, doesn't appear to have any policy at the moment for dealing with China. And this is very, very dangerous for the free world if the United States is not willing to lead. And the Obama era was a period of US retreat, surrender. And the United States kowtowed to China at every opportunity. We cannot allow that to happen for a second time. If that is going to be the approach of a Biden presidency, it will be another period of US decline, as we saw under Obama, and that would be tragic, because if the US is not willing to stand up to China, then no one will on the international stage. The world looks to the United States for leadership, if the US is willing to be prepared to stand up to China on every single front, including, for example, the critically important area of standing up to Chinese companies such as Huawei, for example. And you now see, for example, that the British government, several European governments actually, with US support, reversing course on the Huawei front. And Huawei, as China's biggest technology company, poses a major national security threat to the US and to its allies.
Right.
We've got to see that momentum continuing across the Atlantic, where governments are prepared to fight back against Chinese influence. And we have to see US leadership on that front. Otherwise, the Chinese are going to really take advantage of any sign of weakness on the American side or the European side as well.
Right. And I know that a lot of our enemies were hoping for a Biden presidency over a Trump reelection. Iran and North Korea, China, all wanting, a Biden presidency to hopefully get a weaker man in the White House and to carry on with their activities. I think it's worthwhile to speak about the role of the media in 2020, which was very, very front and center. You usually don't see the media taking such a strong position, being so one-sided. Social media platforms and tech platforms censoring vital information in favor of one candidate over the other, censoring all sorts of speech and talking about whether it's the election or talking about fraud or talking about anything having to do with Hunter Biden's laptop. More specifically, the New York Times came out with a report just a few days ago talking about the role China played in really controlling the narrative that came out about COVID. So, my first question was, aren't people seeing this and really feeling like we are being betrayed by the media that is responsible to deliver the truth when they have it, and to really tell us what's going on rather than manipulating the facts in order to get their preferred candidate into the White House? And in this case, they really manipulated what we knew about China, what they knew about COVID, how they handled COVID in the very beginning. What does this tell us about the media, their role, and will it change in 2021?
Yeah, those are great questions, very important questions, because I think that millions of Americans have lost faith actually in the mainstream media here, and I think that the U.S. media has become increasingly and overwhelmingly politicized, of course, backing one side of the political aisle in this case, and the U.S. media often fails to hold politicians to account if they're on the liberal side. And I think there's a big distinction between the U.S. media and, say, for example, the British media. And of course, there's criticism, for example, of the BBC and some elements of the British media. But the reality is, in the UK overall, the press holds politicians to account. It doesn't matter what party they are, what government is in power. The British press is very old-fashioned in the sense that it likes to ask real, legitimate questions and likes to hold all politicians to account. In terms of public accountability. You don't see that, frankly, in the United States from many media publications. You see an overwhelming liberal political bias in the media. You saw that throughout the election campaign. Right. And you also, frankly, see the suppression as well of free speech in some quarters of the media as well, for all sorts of reasons, ranging from political correctness to political bias, and a refusal to cover certain big stories that would be massive stories in other countries if for their own elections, and I think that rightly so. I think that many Americans have lost faith in the media setup in the United States, with many of the big broadcasters, overwhelmingly liberal dominated broadcasters, and we need to have a media in the United States that actually reports the news. That actually asks real questions to real politicians, and is also willing as well to fully investigate, for example, China's role in the COVID pandemic. And we're now seeing stories in the New York Times appearing after the election. Funnily enough, they did not appear before the election, and we need to see some real investigative journalism being done, and some real professionalism coming from some quarter of the media who have abandoned, I think, their traditional role in favor of sort of political electioneering.
Yeah, I hope that changes and can go back to really, relying on an ethical media, and that really goes back to universities and journalism programs and newsrooms to hold their journalists really accountable for what they put out. Now, I can't let you go by. I have two questions to end with. One is, what do you think was the best news story of 2020? And next, I'd like you to answer, what's your biggest, what do you think will be the biggest foreign policy story or the most important issue going forward into 2021?
Yeah, two wonderful questions. On the first question, I think the biggest positive event, in my view, was Brexit, actually, which took place at the end of January. I was there in London actually for that, and Brexit is so hugely important, not only for Britain but for the world as a whole, because Brexit is all about sovereignty and self-determination. All of the values, principles of the American people have cherished so dearly for hundreds of years, and I think that Brexit is a very big game changer. You have the world's fifth biggest economy actually exiting the European Union, and the UK is a big player on the world stage, and this will have massive implications for the future of Europe actually. So my response to your question is that I think that Brexit is the single biggest positive event of 2020, and we're seeing a full Brexit with Britain leaving the EU Single Market and Customs Union on December 31st. So that's the completion of Brexit at the end of this year. With regard to the second question, I think the biggest foreign policy issue, certainly of the first part of 2021, is going to be Iran, actually. And I think that with the momentum coming from Biden and his team to rejoin the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, that is an incredibly dangerous move forward. And I think that the focus on Iran is going to dominate the first few months of 2021. And I think then also a focus will shift increasingly onto China as well. But I think Iran is going to be the big story of the first few months of 2021. And the United States has a choice to either lead on the world stage, stand up to our adversaries, confront the enemies of freedom, or give in and surrender through policies of appeasement. And any return to the Obama era of foreign policy would be an absolute disaster for the United States. We cannot go down that route.
No, we cannot. And it looks like it's something they want to take care of on Inauguration Day to get back into the Iran nuclear deal. They're very enthusiastic, which makes you more suspect about the whole thing. Thank you so much, Nile Gardiner, for your expertise. Merry Christmas to you and your family. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
And thank you all for tuning in. I wish you and your families a Merry, Merry Christmas. If you'd like to subscribe to our podcast, go to youtube.com/Lisa Daftari. You can also catch us on iTunes and Spotify and Pandora. And to subscribe for our daily top 10, go to foreigndesknews.com. Thank you all. See you again very soon.